Hello everyone, I'm Roz, I'm the online pastor. If you haven't already seen, you might want to check out my first vlog, What on Earth is an Online Pastor Anyway? That'll tell you a little bit more about who I am and what I do. This vlog is the first in a new series that I'm doing. It's called Live Without Limits, and we're going to be looking at what Jesus tells us in Matthew's Gospel about how we should live for him. All the different things that he calls us to do and all the different ways in which that might challenge us to go further than we might have ever thought possible. So this first video, we're just introducing the whole series, and I'm going to read just a few verses from Matthew chapter 4. This week's theme is following without limits. So this is Matthew chapter 4, and I'm going to read verses 18 to 22. As Jesus was walking beside the Sea of Galilee, he saw two brothers, Simon called Peter and his brother Andrew. They were casting a net into the lake, for they were fishermen. "Come, follow me," Jesus said, "and I will make you fishers of men." At once they left their nets and followed him. Going on from there, he saw two other brothers, James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John. They were in a boat with their father Zebedee, preparing their nets. Jesus called them, and immediately they left the boat and their father and followed him. I wonder, how did you begin following Jesus? Perhaps you are somebody who can't ever really remember not following Jesus. Maybe as a small child, your parents always took you to church with them, they prayed with you. You've always thought of yourself as someone who follows Jesus. But perhaps you're someone who later in life came to make a decision. Perhaps you started to think about things for yourself, and Christianity made sense to you, made sense of your life, and you knew that you needed to make a decision to start following Jesus. Perhaps it was very dramatic. You know, I'm sure you've all heard stories of people who had some extraordinary experience, and as a result of that they began to follow Jesus. Perhaps it was just very gradual, very undramatic. We're all different, aren't we? And Jesus calls us to follow him in different ways and at different times. For Peter and Andrew and James and John, in the few verses that I read, it was very sudden, although it doesn't seem like it was very dramatic. At least the way that it's written isn't very dramatic, is it? It's very matter of fact. Jesus said, "Follow me," and so they followed him. But just think for a moment about what that entailed for them. Let me just read verse 19 and 20 again. "Come, follow me," Jesus said, "and I will make you fishers of men." At once they left their nets and followed him. And again, verses 21 and 22, they were James and John were in the boat with their father. Jesus called them, and immediately they left their boat and their father and followed him. Those men left their jobs. That's what they were doing in the boats. That was their job, being fishermen. They left their jobs. They left their family. James and John left their father behind. They left their jobs, their family, their homes. We know they spent the next few years travelling all around Judea with Jesus. They left everything, pretty much, didn't they? I find it almost impossible to imagine what that must have been like. These men, as far as we know, had only just met Jesus. He's barely said anything to them. And maybe they've heard a little bit about this extraordinary man. But even so, it seems like they've only just met him, and yet they are willing to give up everything to follow him. So here's my challenge to you and to me this week. What has it cost you to follow Jesus? What has it cost you to follow Jesus? I'm guessing that for most of us, it hasn't cost us our homes, our families, our jobs. But maybe there are things that it has cost you. Friendships, perhaps. Maybe there have been times where you've really wanted to do something, to go along to a particular party, to be involved in a particular activity, and you haven't been able to do that. because you're a Christian, because you had some prior commitment, because you knew it was the wrong thing to do? What does it cost you to follow Jesus? And secondly, what would you be willing to give up to follow Jesus? What would you be willing to give up to follow Jesus? You see, I think probably all of us secretly have limits on what we are prepared to do for Jesus. I'll follow him so long as it doesn't mean this. So long as I never have to give up that. So long as I can still do this. But I think Jesus expects more of us than that. Just as with those first disciples, with Peter and Andrew, with James and John, they left everything to follow him. I think that's what Jesus expects for us as well. And so this whole series, Live Without Limits, it's going to be a challenge for us to discover what our limits are, where we're putting boundaries on what we're prepared to do to follow Jesus, and to push past those limits. So this week, why don't you pray that God will help you see what limits you've set on following him, and that he will give you the faith to overcome those. So there's a challenge, there's something to pray. And here's something I'd love to suggest as well, maybe here in the comments or in the Facebook group, wherever you feel comfortable. I'd love to hear how you began to follow Jesus. What's your story? Was it very sudden? Was it very dramatic? Was it very gradual, very quiet? Are you someone who's always followed Jesus? Is that a new thing for you? I'd love to hear your story, and I'd love to hear what it cost you to start following Jesus. If you've got something that you can say, yeah, I had to give that up. I had to make a choice. I had to leave that behind to follow Jesus. I'd love to hear about that too.